If you invested $10,000 in Palantir 2 years ago, you'd have almost $170,000 today. But the AI boom is just beginning. In fact, the global artificial intelligence market is expected to more than 8x in size over the next 8 years, which would be a compound annual growth rate of 30% through 2033. That's 2.5 times the S&P 500's average rate of return over the last 15 years. So in this video, I'll go over the best funds to buy and hold forever, so that I win no matter what happens with Trump's tariffs or which company wins the AI race. That's the best way to get rich without getting lucky. Your time is valuable, so let's get right into it. First things first, I'm not here to waste your time, so here's every fund I'll cover in this video, and there are timestamps so you can jump around. But let me point out a few quick things before you do. First, this isn't some random list like you might see in other videos. I picked these funds specifically based on how their holdings overlap, to give me extra exposure to the best AI stocks while still staying safe, especially with all the economic uncertainty around President Trump's tariffs and a potential recession on the horizon. Second, this isn't trying to be some ultimate list of funds. It's a solid foundation for portfolios of all sizes, and it's fine to add other ETFs or individual stocks to this list. And third, I'm not a financial advisor. My background is in electrical engineering and data science, and I have 10 years of industry experience using AI to solve real-world problems. I invest in what I know, which is why every investment I cover focuses on high-growth markets like robotics and machine learning, semiconductors, and cybersecurity, all of which are expected to grow much faster than the S&P 500. Before I left for my honeymoon, I focused on the Trump administration's tariffs, since they have such a big impact on the industries I cover. Well, just yesterday, massive tariffs on goods from China went into effect for shipments worth $800 or less. This one change could more than double the costs to American consumers shopping at companies like Shein, Temu, and AliExpress. According to a congressional research report, over 80% of all US e-commerce shipments fell into this category in 2022, and that number has only gone up as costs of living keep rising. So, this tariff is going to send real shockwaves through the consumer economy. And don't forget, President Trump announced a 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs for all countries except China on April 9th, which means the pause ends on July 8th, just over 1 month from today. It takes around 30 days for shipping containers to go from China to California, and around 50 days for those goods to reach New York. So consumers will just start feeling the effects of these tariffs over the next few weeks, and companies will start feeling the impacts in their Q2 earnings. I picked these first two funds with all of that in mind. Let's start with VGT, the Vanguard Information Technology ETF. The advice I always get is to dollar cost average into the S&P 500, which is a basket of 500 stocks from the biggest public US companies weighted by their market cap. So the more valuable the company, the bigger its position in this index. This strategy comes with two big problems, especially in uncertain markets driven by fear. 500 companies is a lot, which stops any one company from taking up more than 7 or 8% of this index. That means the S&P 500 grows slow and steady, even when its top stocks are growing fast. On top of that, it includes companies like ExxonMobil, Home Depot, and Coca-Cola, which aren't exactly the kinds of stocks I think will win big during this generative AI boom. On the other hand, VGT is filled entirely with companies focused on semiconductors, hardware, system software, and applications, while skipping companies like Home Depot and Coca-Cola altogether. This isn't some new fund trying to cash in on the latest trend. VGT was created in 2004, it has slightly lower fees than SPY, and it's more than doubled the SPY's performance since inception. Part of that is because VGT tracks 310 stocks instead of the S&P's 500. 310 is still a lot of diversification, but not so much that it can't make big moves, especially since its top 3 holdings account for more than 45% of the fund. So VGT is a well-diversified, low-fee fund that still lets its biggest winners ride, making it a great fund to get rich without getting lucky or losing too much peace of mind along the way. And speaking of losing peace of mind, I found out that over 100 online data brokers were selling my personal data, and they might be selling yours too. That's why I joined Delete Me, the sponsor of this video. Delete Me is a hands-free subscription service that will remove your personal information from hundreds of online data brokers. You just sign up, enter your information, and let their experts get to work. They've reviewed over 46,000 listings for me so far, across 107 different data brokers. After 7 days, you get a privacy report showing everything they've done. I just got my 9th report, and these data brokers had way more than just my personal information. They had my wife's and my mom's too. But here's the best part. They'll keep scanning these websites even after they remove my data. And I get my own privacy advisor if I want to talk to a real person and make a custom removal request. So if you care about your data and your family's privacy, you can get 20% off any consumer plan with my code SYMBOL20 by going to joindeleteme.com/symbol20 or by using my link in the description. And a big thank you to Delete Me for supporting the channel and keeping my family's data safe. Alright, the Vanguard IT ETF is a great foundation for any portfolio because it has high performance, low fees, and fixes some of the biggest issues with investing in the S&P 500. But there's a different problem that happens during high economic uncertainty, like when we have unpredictable tariffs or a possible recession. Let me show you the problem first, and then highlight how this next fund solves it. Before my trip in mid-April, I highlighted the Fear and Greed Index because it was showing some of the most extreme fear I'd ever seen. But over the next few weeks, the Fear and Greed rating jumped from 4 to 43, and where it goes next is anybody's guess. In fact, we can see that this index has been lower on average and very choppy over the last 6 months since the election. That high level of uncertainty is why the S&P 500 has basically been flat for the last few months, as big institutional investors keep their cash piles on the sidelines or end up investing that cash into bonds. This Fear and Greed Index is calculated from 7 broad market indicators, and the first one is market momentum. Market momentum compares the S&P 500 to its 125-day moving average. There are around 250 trading days in a year, so this is really its 6-month moving average, and the distance between that average and today's price tells us how much momentum the market currently has and in which direction. The stock market's momentum collapsed when President Trump started ramping up tariffs, and it rebounded when he announced that 90-day pause in early April. And like I said in my previous videos, I expect a lot more pauses, delays, and sweeping changes to tariffs since Trump is using them as more of a negotiation tactic than a long-term economic policy. And that means we can expect more wild swings in market momentum. That's why the second fund on my list is SPMO, the S&P 500 Momentum ETF. Don't let the name fool you. This fund doesn't track the S&P 500, and its holdings are balanced completely differently. The reason it's called the S&P 500 Momentum ETF is because it holds 100 stocks from the S&P 500 with the highest momentum score, which is defined as the stock's 12-month change in price divided by its volatility. And then that momentum score is multiplied by the company's market cap to get the final weightings inside the fund, which completely changes the order of its holdings. For example, the top 3 companies in SPMO are Amazon, nvidia, and Meta Platforms, while Apple, Microsoft, and nvidia sit at the top of the S&P 500 and VGT. That means I get 2 big benefits by holding this fund alongside VGT. First, I'm diversifying the way that my funds get managed and rebalanced. VGT holds 310 stocks focused on specific market sectors, while SPMO holds 100 stocks focused on high momentum. VGT is rebalanced quarterly, while SPMO is rebalanced twice a year, letting its winners ride even longer. And similar to VGT, this fund has low fees of just 0.13%, and it has a long history of high performance. It's been around for 10 years, and has beaten the S&P 500 on every single timescale by multiple percentage points. And if we look at the last 12 months, the S&P 500 is up by around 10%, but SPMO is up by more than double that over the same time frame. That's the impact of factoring in momentum. While VGT and SPMO can be the foundation for any long-term all-weather portfolio, these next 2 funds are much more specialized and focused on AI. Remember, the global artificial intelligence market is expected to more than 8x in size over the next 8 years. That's a compound annual growth rate of 30% through 2033. But instead of trying to predict the biggest AI winners over the next 8 years, some of which probably don't even exist yet, or worrying about which companies are the best at dealing with these tariffs, I'm just looking to get broad exposure to the markets benefiting the most from AI. That way I win no matter which company ends up on top. So my pick for semiconductors is SMH, the VanEck Semiconductor ETF. I've owned this fund for a few years now for a few key reasons. First, it only tracks 25 companies, and the top 5 are nvidia, Taiwan Semiconductor, Broadcom, ASML, and Applied Materials, all of which I cover very often on this channel, and they make up over 50% of this fund by weight. That's very concentrated, which is why we started with VGT and SPMO, and I'm using SMH to get even more exposure to semiconductors on top of that. SMH also has a fairly low expense ratio of 0.35%. While that sounds high compared to the first two funds, SMH has returned a whopping 240% over the last 5 years, even after the recent declines due to tariffs. And just like the first two funds, SMH has a long history of high performance. If you invested $10,000 in SMH when it was created back in 2011, you'd have over $170,000 today. And the next few years look just as good for semiconductors, since the global AI chip market is expected to almost 9x over the next 8 years, which would be a compound annual growth rate of 31% through 2033. And I think it could grow even faster than expected, as we find new AI use cases, build more foundational AI models, and have more AI breakthroughs over time. SMH is a great way to capture all of that growth and get rich without getting lucky, since huge growth happens when an existing company already has the perfect product for a high growth market. In this case, semiconductor companies like nvidia and Broadcom are building the chips powering massive AI models, like OpenAI's GPT-4o and Google Gemini 2.5, while new chip competitors and quantum computing companies are still scaling up. That's why this fund has outperformed most individual stocks on the market. But since SMH focuses on AI hardware, we need another fund that focuses on the software side of things. That's where the fourth fund on my list comes in. And if you feel I've earned it, consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. That lets me know to make more content like this. Thanks, and with that out of the way, let's talk about the fourth fund on my list. Did you know that 40% of all phishing emails targeting businesses are now generated by AI, and that 60% of all recipients actually fall for them? Or that spammers are using large language models to save 95% of the costs of generating these phishing emails in the first place? And that's just text-based phishing attempts. 61% of organizations saw a rise in deepfakes last year, and they're projected to increase by another 50% or more this year. 75% of deepfakes impersonated a CEO or other C-level executive, and these impersonation scams did $12.5 billion worth of damage in 2023. That number is expected to climb to $40 billion per year in 2027. So even though every company is investing in AI right now, there's one part of their budgets that they're never going to cut, and that's cybersecurity. In fact, the global cloud security market is expected to almost 4x in size by 2032, which would be a compound annual growth rate of over 22% for the next 7 years. But just like artificial intelligence is actually many different things, so too is cybersecurity. For example, access management and authentication focuses on making sure that only the right users can be on a specific network. Identity protection is all about preventing an individual's information from getting stolen. That's where Delete Me fits in, but for your personal data on the open web instead of on a company's network. And endpoint protection is all about securing edge devices like laptops and smartphones before they join a network in the first place. And as generative AI keeps evolving, I think all of these different cybersecurity areas will grow even faster than analysts are expecting, since we'll have new rules and regulations around data security, new kinds of data that need securing in the first place, new types of malware and hacking techniques, and way more cyber threats in general based on all the statistics that I just showed you. That's why the fourth fund on my list is CIBR, the First Trust NASDAQ Cybersecurity ETF. The top 10 holdings in CIBR make up over 60% of the fund and include companies like CrowdStrike, Broadcom, which owns Symantec, and Palo Alto Networks, all of which have been on my list of stocks to get rich without getting lucky in the past. In fact, just those 3 companies make up about a quarter of the fund by weight. And just like SMH, CIBR only holds 32 companies, which means it's a concentrated fund that can make big moves. In fact, it's up 6% year to date, while the S&P 500 is down by 3%. It's returned 25% in the past year and over 140% in the last 5 years. So this is another fund that performs as well as most individual growth stocks. And I expect that growth to continue as cybersecurity becomes an even bigger issue for businesses and individuals in the AI era. Alright, I know this video is a little long, but I wanted to be thorough since funds need some extra consideration for things like investing strategy and management fees, the number of stocks and their individual weights, and how the holdings in each fund overlap. You probably noticed that companies like nvidia and Broadcom sit at the top of multiple funds on this list, even though they have completely different strategies. This is why it's so important to think about portfolios as a whole, and how each fund and individual stock works together. That's the best way to get rich without getting lucky or trying to pick a single winner. And if you want to see what else I'm buying to get rich without getting lucky, check out this video next. Thanks for watching to the end, even though I gave you everything up front. And until next time, this is ticker symbol U. My name is Alex, reminding you that the best investment you can make is in you.